Thank you. Tom Kalil is a core advisor to BrainMind. He's helping us to think through areas of neuroscience in most need of investment. He is an expert there, as he is one of the people who created the Brain Initiative. He is currently the Chief Innovation Officer of SMIT Futures, and under the Clinton and Obama administrations, Kalil began the trend of providing incentive prizes for innovation, and he helped to launch the Nanotechnology Initiative in 2000. He's somebody that I deeply admire. He's giving a talk about BrainMind and areas of leverage. Please welcome Tom.
Good morning. Is everyone fired up and ready to go? All right. So this is a talk about the value of agenda setting. And I wanted to start off with a case study, which is in April 2013, President Obama unveiled the Brain Initiative, and it was thanks to the hard work of a lot of people, including Mi-Young Chun, who is at the Kavli Foundation, my colleague Phil Rubin, people from the agencies, NIH, DARPA, IARPA, and the National Science Foundation. And it grew out of a conviction by a number of scientists and engineers, including George, that we were underinvesting in the tools that were needed to understand how the brain encodes and processes information. So in the same way that for the Human Genome Project, we radically drove down the cost of sequencing the human genome, the hypothesis of the Brain Initiative was if we invested in a set of tools, this would improve our ability to understand how the brain encodes and processes information. So I believe that it would be useful to have as a capacity of the BrainMind effort, number one, the ability to identify areas of research and commercialization where we're underinvesting relative to the importance of those areas, and then also have a sense for what we, for some definition of we, should do about it. And I think that's particularly important in those areas where there's a structural reason why we're underinvesting. So I believe it's also useful to start off with the Hamming question. He was a researcher at Bell Labs who, in the Bell Labs cafeteria, would accost other scientists and say, what's the most important question in your field and why aren't you working on it? So this is a great question to ask scientists and engineers. Now, obviously, we're already doing a lot. So the NIH alone is investing over $8 billion a year in neuroscience. The Brain Initiative is still going strong. Congress, for the NIH component of it, has actually provided 10 years of funding for it. So this is something that they almost never do. We have support from philanthropists and private research organizations like the Howard Hughes Medical Institute and the Allen Institute, Kavli, Simons, and many others. There are 37,000 members of the Society for Neuroscience and over 1,300 drugs that are in various stages of drug discovery and development. So a lot going on. But there are some areas where I believe that we're underinvesting relative to the importance of it. So one is obviously that the NIH, their mission is to focus primarily on disease and pathology as opposed to human flourishing. So that's an area where we're probably underinvesting. There is a gallows humor in the research community that you have to have done the experiment before you write the grant. So clearly one problem is the ability of the government to support high-risk, high-return research. And that flows from, in some cases, the peer review process, which is good at weeding out crappy proposals, but it also, unfortunately, will sometimes weed out proposals that are very promising, but don't have a lot of preliminary evidence. Research that is motivated by non-health goals. Again, it's the National Institute of Health. So we're underinvesting in applying neuroscience to education and training. And one of my colleagues, David Markowitz with IARPA, it is called attention to the fact that we have the potential to create a virtuous circle at the intersection of neuroscience and AI, where we're not only asking what can AI do for neuroscience in terms of the interpretation of large amounts of data, but what can neuroscience do for AI? Big science, there may be some areas where we need industrial scale research as support for individual labs. And then NIH, this is something that Phil Sharp at MIT has written a lot about, which is if a growing trend is the convergence of biology and the physical sciences and engineering, NIH tends to underinvest in the physical sciences, math, and engineering. So these are examples of some of the areas where the public sector is underinvesting. What about the private sector? So VC is doing great at investing in things that venture capitalists call capital efficient, and what they mean by that is it doesn't take a huge amount of money to find out whether a startup is going to be successful. So they're really knocking it out of the park in areas like software and the internet. They're doing less well in those areas that take a long time and cost a lot of money. So advanced materials is a classic example of that. It can take 17 to 20 years to go from discovery to high volume manufacturing of a new material, and that's something that doesn't fit the venture model very well. There are areas that have high social returns and low private returns where VC is going to underinvest. So an example would be antibiotics. So from the point of view of the drug company, antibiotics are a disaster because you take a course for 7 days and then you're cured. So what fun is that? So the latest calculations are that if we live in a post-antibiotic, post-penicillin world, the economic costs, the global economic costs between now and 2050 will be $100 trillion. The UN estimating that the number of fatalities associated with antibiotic-resistant bacteria could rise to 7 million a year. So that's an example of something that has a huge social return but a low private return. So what are different models for addressing these gaps? So one thing is that you see the empowered high net worth individual. So the ability for individuals to make investments that are not solely motivated by financial return. So Elon Musk is investing in SpaceX not solely because he wants to increase his wealth, but because he believes that humanity should be a multiplanetary species. So that is one model that we're seeing, and seeing companies like Neuralink and Kernel that fit into that category. Intermediaries for impact investors. So in the energy area, for example, a number of investors that are motivated more by impact than financial return are trying to identify areas for clean energy investment that the market may be underinvesting in. Different mechanisms for addressing the so-called valley of death, including one that President Reif at MIT has created called the Engine, again, for these startups that take longer and cost more money. Lawrence Berkeley National Lab has developed another model called Cyclotron Road. National research initiatives like the BRAIN Initiative, which was designed to address the underinvestment in tools. But you really need to start with a compelling idea that will serve as a magnet for public and private resources. And my experience is that some of the elements of that idea are an ambitious and clearly important goal, a Goldilocks level of specificity. So it has to be broader than people should give more money to my lab, but also not like we should improve the human condition. So there's something in between there that is sort of the sweet spot for big enough to matter, but not so big that it seems impossible to know where to get started. A compelling why now story. So one of the things about the BRAIN Initiative was that there's a sense that if we'd done this 10 years ago, it would have been too soon. But something has changed about the world that leads us to believe that the previously impossible is now possible. And I think that if you can combine those things, the audacious goal that is clearly important and the why now story, you can begin to create this self-fulfilling prophecy. And then that requires building the coalition of the willing and able that is necessary to do that. So one of the thought experiments I like to ask people is that you have a magic laptop such that any press release that you write will come true. And what you have to do is generate a headline, which is a goal statement, several paragraphs that provide context, and paragraph-level descriptions of who is agreeing to do what. DARPA and the other DARPA-inspired agencies have a great set of questions called the Heilmar Catechism, named after George Heilmar, that is a good starting place for designing research initiatives. And so I really believe, as President Kennedy put it, by defining our goals more clearly, by making it seem more manageable and less remote, we help all people to see it, to draw hope from it, and to move irresistibly towards it. So that's your mission for the rest of the day. No pressure.